Andrea Campbell represented Dorchester and Mattapan on the Boston City Council for 6 years. In 2018, she became the first black woman ever elected president of the council, and last year she finished third in a bid for Boston mayor. She joins me now. Andrea Campbell, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Why are you the best candidate for the job?
For several reasons. One, I think I bring the unique and different lived experience. I've already been on the trail crisscrossing the state, and I will continue to, talking about my lived experience and growing up, frankly, in a family torn apart by poverty, incarceration, and crime, which of course is very much what the families are dealing with in the Commonwealth right now. I bring a unique legal experience. I worked in the nonprofit sector as an education attorney, in state government as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick, as well as for a regional planning agency, and that elected experience. So all of that is unique. And in this moment in time, I'm really excited for my candidacy and to get out there and tell folks what the AG's office can do in their daily lives.
Anything Maura Healey did that you would do differently as Attorney General?
Well, one, I always think it's best to start and give credit where credit's due. She's done incredible work when it comes to addressing the opioid crisis, climate change, environmental injustice. But for me, it's bringing a unique lens, definitely looking, of course, at ways in which to deal with racial disparities, of course, looking at the criminal legal system. I talk a lot about my twin brother, Andre, who was very much one reason I got into the work of public service. And so still a lot of work to do there. But then also, when it comes to other inequities that families are struggling with across the Commonwealth, this is an office that can make sure that you can stay in your home, that you can buy a home, make sure that your kids have access to a good education, a living wage, benefits. And so for me, taking this holistic approach to the families which are suffering, frankly, right now in the Commonwealth is also critically important too.
Any area where she came up short in your estimation, Andrea Campbell?
Well, I think for me, I had a lot of conversations, for example, today talking about health inequities and really looking at the racial disparities that continue to exist when it comes to access to healthcare, when it comes to building trust with communities of color, which we know is still very important as we deal with COVID. But in addition to that, for me, it's also about pushing the envelope on what the office is capable of. I've already been on the trail telling folks that this office can indeed ensure that families have access to good education and pre-K. This office can make sure that we are prepared for the foreclosure crisis that might come up outside of COVID. This office can deal with public safety issues, make sure our officers are resourced, at the same time ensuring transparency and accountability in all of our systems. So for me, that is really important, but also looking at everything through an equity lens and driving an agenda through that lens.
I want to broach a couple of issues with you that you would either have formal power over as Attorney General or the bully pulpit power. For starters, as you well know, close to 750,000 people in the state received roughly almost $3 billion in unemployment benefits during the pandemic that they were not entitled to. Through no fault of their own, no fraud, the state wants that money back. One, do you think those people who got it, again, through no fault of their own, should have to repay it? And if the answer is no, what would you do as Attorney General to help them?
Well, I think it's a conversation we need to have. Families right now are still struggling in the midst of COVID. Families are still losing their jobs, concerned about, of course, what will come next. There's still a lot of uncertainty right now. And so I do think when government makes a mistake, we need to own that it was, government's fault, while at the same time seeing how we can do to sort of right a wrong. If there's some, obviously these are public dollars and we have to be mindful of that. But there's a way in which to have a process. There's a way in which I think to be really thoughtful in our conversations. And I know for me, I can't stress this enough. My goal is to really continue to be a leader that deals with things from a bottom-up approach, not a top-down approach. That requires us to go into communities and to have real conversations on the things that families are struggling with right now, because that is true across the Commonwealth, all the way out to Berkshire County, the Cape and Islands, you name it. Families are struggling in many ways. So right now, I think the conversation needs about how do we support them? How do we ensure that they can thrive, of course, post-COVID pandemic? And then, of course, get a good footing so that they're prepared for the next thing that may come, including another pandemic in the future.
All three of you running for the nomination have either on your website for the campaign or on the campaign trail talked about combating systemic racism. Can you tell me specifically what you would do as Attorney General to do that?
Essentially, it's a continuation of the work I've done my entire life. As the city council president in Boston, I brought that whole institution through racial equity training. I fought for funding to make sure that that institution had that. But I also know training is not enough. It really is about intentionality. Everything we do, whether it's around healthcare, housing, the environment, climate, of course, the opioid crisis, criminal legal reform, you name it. It's really important that we look at issues through that lens, look at the disproportionate impact it can have on communities of color, and to make sure that as we are executing our responsibilities through regulations, legislation, et cetera, that everyone feels as though they're actually benefiting. But I'll add this. Many folks don't understand that when we're talking about racial disparities in any system, that does not just affect people of color or low-income residents. All of us are affected by that. Because when the system fails some of us, it fails all of us and holds us back, including Massachusetts, from reaching its full potential. And so for me, it's important to get out there and have those sometimes hard conversations with constituents, and of course, to talk about how I would continue to be a leader in this work.
Qualified immunity is the legal doctrine that basically shields public employees, including police officers, from liability for what they did in the course of their job. When the criminal justice reform bill in the state was signed at the end of 2020, there was a minor change. Some people think it should be done away with. Do you?
I've already been on record. I chaired the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice for the City Council, pushing for reform. I restored a line item literally in our state budget to support officers in community policing. At the same time, I believe in transparency and accountability. No one should be above the law. And when someone commits any type of heinous act against a resident of the Commonwealth, they should be held accountable. It should be no different depending on what you do. And so I think there really needs to be some deep conversations as a state, as a Commonwealth on that issue and so many others, because no one should be above the law. And I think that is the mantra we need to stand by in everything we do.
I just need to be clear. Does that mean if they shouldn't be above the law that there should be no qualified immunity for police officers in Massachusetts?
No, I've come out in record against that. And I think that everyone should be held accountable accordingly. And I will just add, in the context of George Floyd and other painful murders, of course, we've seen across the country, usually justice and accountability are not what wins the day because of laws like this that hold us back. I think there's a way to have a very thoughtful conversation with law enforcement on these issues and to move the needle forward for transparency and accountability, because at the end of the day, no one should be above the law when they commit wrongdoing. And that's what we're talking about here.
We have less than a minute left. One last thing. We are the only state in America where the legislature, the governor's office, and the judiciary claim to be exempt from public record laws. Is that okay, or should it be fixed?
I think it should be fixed. I truly believe in transparency, accountability, equity, justice, and that's true for public officials. On the city council side, when I was in my role as an elected official for the city council, we had to, of course, abide by public records law. Everyone should. As a lawyer for Governor Patrick, I had to make sure that his administration and many others responded to these types of requests. Transparency is one fundamental foundation for government. It allows us to build trust. And so I think things that stand in the way of that should be reevaluated.
Andrea Campbell, good luck. Great to see you. Hope to see you a lot in the coming year.
Thank you.